Hi, I'm Darren Morton and welcome to Happiness by Design. In this episode, I hope that you discover rest. Well, specifically, we're going to be looking at how rest can actually affect our emotional state. And we're going to look at this from two perspectives. First of all, the whole issue of sleep, which is obviously an integral part of rest and the rest equation. And secondly, the concept of Sabbath, and I'll be having a guest with me to consider that in more detail. But first, to sleep. I imagine there's not too many people that would dispute the fact that our sleep and the quantity that we receive of it affects the way that we feel. I'm the father of 3 young children, and it's not that long ago. We're sort of moving from those crazy days, but it's not that long ago when I can remember standing there in the middle of the night with a baby that's screaming and just honestly thinking to myself, I am going to die. I'm going to die. Just give me sleep. And as you look down there, you are so numb with sleep deprivation that you're trying to put that dummy, that pacifier into the baby's eye socket rather than down their mouth. No wonder they're screaming. But it's taxing, and we've all encountered periods in our life when we're just not getting quite enough rest, and we can all testify to the effect that it can have on our mood state. Spare a thought though for Randy Gardner. Now, Randy Gardner is the man who officially holds the Guinness Book of World Records for going without sleep. Now, at the time Randy said it was some 20 years or so ago. Now, Randy was thinking to himself, he was a college student, he thought, I need to do something special. I need to put my name in the history books. And so he started to think, what could I do? And then he thought to himself, well, I'm a college student and typically we're pretty good at just not going without sleep. So therefore, why don't I have a dig at that one? And so he lined it up and he went about trying to go for the longest period of time that he could without sleep. He achieved the grand total of 264 hours, or 11 days. Now, it was interesting because at the time, one of the key sleep researchers, Dr. William Demmett, was interested in this story of Randy going for this Guinness Book of Records, and so he and his research assistant flew down and met with Randy. I think it was about day 3 into his plight, and helped Randy achieve his goal of trying to go for the 11 days. And it's interesting, they talk about during this, throughout the day, Randy would have times when he would be quite normal and be able to converse quite in an average kind of way. But then there were those deep, dark times when Randy just felt dreadful. And they said that often this would occur at around about sort of 3 in the morning. And Dr. Demmett, who was most interested in what would happen if someone went for too long without sleep, talks about at 3 in the morning either taking Randy out to play basketball or making him walk just to keep him awake. And when all else failed, he would sit about 6 inches from his face and yell, "Come on, Randy, you can do it, you can do it, hang in there." And poor Randy, with eyes so heavy, would look at him and say, "Why are you doing this to me?" Well, there's no doubt about it. If we don't get enough sleep, we don't feel our best. But let me ask, does it actually affect our health? Well, if you want to ask anyone, ask the rats that have been involved in sleep deprivation studies. Typically, they will die after about 18 days of having no sleep. They develop sores on their bodies. It's not a nice sign. In fact, in studies in humans actually suggest that the amount of sleep that you've had before being exposed to a virus actually will influence whether you will develop that virus or not. So it certainly seems the case that sleep deprivation can actually affect our health in a very real way. In fact, some studies even suggest, and I hate to say this, but some studies suggest that the amount of quality sleep that we receive is even more important than diet, and here we go, even more important than exercise, which I'm a big proponent for, in determining our longevity. So indeed it seems the case that sleep not only affects the way that we feel, but it also affects us, our health, in a very real and meaningful way. And so the question is, how much sleep do we need? Well, I wonder, how much sleep do you get? When researchers started to address this question, how much sleep do people actually need? They thought, well, we need some elaborate studies to test this hypothesis and develop this idea further. And they looked at people and they found that some people seem to not need too much at all, and others seem to need an exorbitant amount of sleep. One interesting fact is that we've found that too much sleep can actually be detrimental to your health when you start getting beyond sort of 10 hours each night. But the researchers in these studies, they set up this situation where they rented out an entire block of flats, if you like, and then they plastered up all the walls such that no natural light could get in there. And then they asked people who, if anyone would like sort of, 6 months out. 6 months out of life, you can do what you like, but you've got to come and live in our little rented block here. And there were many people that put their hand up for this particular study. And so what they did is they brought these individuals into their own little unit, their own flat, and they were instructed that for the first 20 days, what would happen is that at midnight, the lights would turn off and they needed to go to sleep. And then at 8 in the morning, the lights would turn back on and they would have to wake up, and then they could go about their business for the day. And they did various things, and they had leads hanging off them most of the time whilst the researchers took body measurements. And then after this 20-day period, what they did is they said, now you are free to turn the lights on and the lights off whenever you like. And they started to watch what happened to how much sleep people naturally wanted. And as it turned out, the average for all of the individuals involved in the study was around about 8.25 hours each night. That's what they seem naturally to want to gravitate towards. And so it's true, the old 8 hours a day roughly seems to be a fairly good guide. Most people it's somewhere between about 7 and 9 hours, some people a little less, but often you find those that go or claim to get by on a lot less are notorious for the power naps throughout the course of the day. I think Thomas Jefferson apparently, he viewed sleep as a waste of time and got in the way of his busy schedule, and so he reported that he would only sleep about 4.5 hours each night, but he was also known to be nodding off during the day and even taking those little power naps to keep himself going. So while it seems that most of us need about 8.25 hours of sleep each night, the sad reality is that most of us are not achieving that. In fact, in the past 100 years or so, the past century, it seems that our amount of sleep that we're receiving has gone down by about 20%. And one of the main reasons for that is that unlike those times, we have the opportunity now with our electrical circuits and electrical lights to create artificial light, to make day or night seem like day, I should say. And so therefore, many of us are functioning in a state of semi-sleep deprivation. There's a very interesting study done by sleep researchers where they asked individuals to come and just lay in bed for 12 hours every day. Now, I'm sure that they didn't have any problems finding people to put their hands up to be involved in this particular study. But what they found is that over the first sort of several days, people slept quite a long period of time. But then after they paid back a sleep debt of around about sort of 25 to 30 hours, then they went back into only sleeping about sort of 8.25 hours each night. The rest of the time they just lay there thinking about things. And so what we can conclude is that most of us are probably walking around in a mildly sleep-deprived state most of the time. We're carrying with us a sleep debt. Now don't go away, because after the break I want to ask the question, why is it that sometimes we can get a lot of sleep and yet feel so tired? Hi and welcome back. Before the break, I posed the question, why is it that sometimes we can get plenty of sleep and yet feel lousy, and then vice versa, sometimes we can actually get relatively little sleep and actually feel quite sprightly and alive and awake. I can recall on one occasion when we had the young children and the sleep deprivation was a big issue for my wife and I, that I had a major speaking engagement and I was quite worked up about this and I'd sort of been trying to plan for it, and then we had this period of 3 or 4 nights where our children were ill and up all night, and it was just plain and arduous. And I remember the night before, lying there in bed as I got woken up for like the 7th or 8th time, I'd lost count, just thinking to myself, oh no, this is like the worst possible scenario. I'm going to be so tired in the morning. And then after essentially no sleep, woke up in the morning, got up and felt quite alive and quite awake. And why is it? I'm sure that you've had a similar instance where you have plenty of sleep and you might feel not so good, and sometimes you have not much sleep and feel quite alive. Well, the answer is that our body has natural rhythms. We call these biorhythms, or sometimes they're called circadian rhythms. And what they are is these cycles that our body follows, and there's a whole range of dynamics that occur within us. Our core temperature changes throughout the course of the day in cyclic type patterns, and also our hormonal profiles affect us as well. And these have a large impact on how we feel. For example, generally throughout about the mid-morning, these cycles tend to peak, and that's why we feel quite alive. After lunch, they dip again, and so therefore we tend to feel a bit drowsy and down. And then later in the afternoon, into the early evening, they start to peak once again. And then they hit their lowest point at around about 3 in the morning. And that is one of the reasons they attribute so many accidents. For example, some of the great shipping disasters have actually occurred around 3 in the morning. And it's often because the pioneers, the drivers of these vessels, are actually feeling the effects of their biorhythms. Jet lag is a classic example of our circadian rhythms, or our biorhythms being upset. We go to a place and all of a sudden our body's peaking when really it should be down here, and vice versa. And so we fly to the other side of the world and we find that we're up and ready to go when the rest of the nation is sleeping. There's actually things that we can do to change our biorhythms, and what they have found, the sleep researchers, is that getting up in the morning and exposing yourself, particularly your eyes, to natural sunlight. That doesn't mean staring at the sun, but just getting out into the natural environment and doing some activity in the early morning can help reset our biological clocks and get our biorhythms working for us. What's the take-home message of all of this? Well, we need to prize our sleep. You know, sleep is paramount, not just to how we feel, but to our health as well. We need to value it. There is another aspect of rest, though, that I would like to speak about, and this is a tremendously powerful principle. And to talk about it, I have a guest with me today, Dr. Ray Rowan. So welcome, Ray, to the show.
Thank you, Darren. Glad to be here.
Now, Ray, I understand you are presently the Dean of the Faculty of Theology at Avondale College, is that right?
I am.
So that means I have to be my best behaviour?
Oh, you've never managed it in the past.
Well, you're very gracious, very gracious. Now, Ray, I'm interested in, we've been talking about the importance of rest and the value that can add to our life in a whole range of ways. And I'm interested in this concept of Sabbath. So can you tell us, what's the history of this concept we call Sabbath?
Yeah, the word just means rest.
Rest.
So, yeah, interesting word. And basically, Christians and Jews especially, or some Christians and Jews, see it as very important as dating back to the beginning of things, and pointing to a rest that God gave for human beings right at the beginning.
Right, and so when you say God gave, what was the deal? What was the Sabbath? What was meant to happen on the Sabbath, kind of thing?
Yeah, well, the good news is that there were basically 2 rules about it, and one just said don't work, which
I like that
seems
so
to me to be really good news, and the other one was rest.
Rest, so take time out.
Yeah, take time out.
And now, so how does it work? How often are you meant to rest? Is it like every sort of afternoon? Is it?
That's a good question, and it's a really important question today. Basically, the biblical idea is every 7 days. So work 6 days, or do your own thing 6 days, and then on the 7th have a break.
So it's almost as if God's implemented this cycle that we're meant to follow.
Yeah,
so 6 days. I wonder. I'm interested. We talk about cycles. Much of our world is governed by cycles, isn't it? We have the yearly cycle. It's sort of one, and they're sort of governed, I suppose, for good reason, by celestial events. Because the ancients. So I know that the year, from my basic anatomy or basic astronomy in grade 6.
I think better than anatomy.
Yeah, better than anatomy. It's one lap of the Earth around the sun, and then our moon is the same. It's sort of one lap. Our month. The moon gives the month.
Yeah, and the day.
And the day. Why a 6 day on, 1 day off? Where does that come from?
It actually seems to be quite arbitrary.
Right.
Except maybe it has something to do with the way that we've been designed.
Right, so it would be fair to say that probably, well, certainly, this 6 day on, 1 day off works very well for us as humans.
Certainly works for me.
Works for you?
Yeah.
You know, I'm actually thinking, I mean, I've have a lot of experience sort of with athletes and trying to nurture them and getting the most out of themselves. And I'm just thinking, even if in athletic arenas, we know that that's the case. It's athletes who follow a pattern, or essentially they need a day off.
Yeah.
One in 6. If they overdo it, they move into this, we call overtraining syndrome. But I imagine it's not just the physical sort of body and, physical performance, which this principle of 6 days on, 1 day off works very nicely with. What's some other areas of our life where it perhaps?
I think the whole of our life, really. And I see it particularly important as far as worship, although I worship every day. It's a really important time out for me to spend time with my family, time with God. Hugh Mackay, an Australian sociologist, said that it's really important that we prioritise, and also he talks about spending time in reflective detachment. That means actually taking time out.
Right.
And he suggests that that's best done on a regular sort of basis.
Right, reflective detachment. I like that word. Might you ask you more about that just after the break. Stay with us. And welcome back. Before the break, Ray, you threw around an interesting term, reflective detachment, and the role that Sabbath may play in that. What do you mean by it?
This is Hugh Mackay's term in his book, Reinventing Australia.
Right.
And he talks about a couple of things that we need to do if we're going to make sense of our lives, given the frantic sort of pace in which we live. And basically, that means taking regular time out. And he talks about taking time out on a regular basis, and it may... He talks about it might include sport, recreation, worship, taking a full day off included in that sort of idea. So that's basically what I try to do every week.
It's interesting, though I know that many people would be listening to this and saying, yeah, well, guess what, though? If I were to try and take a day off a week, I just couldn't achieve what I need to be done. It seems to me that there's something within the human psyche that says more is better. That we can get more done if we have more time. Do you think that's the case?
I don't think so, because you have a family, and you know that if you're really going to make it as a father and as a family person, you've actually got to take time with your family. So you're a busy person, you're an academic, but to really make sense of your life, you say, okay, drop that. For a certain period of time and take time out.
I wonder whether, I just think back when I was doing one of my research degrees, I had this period where you get into that, as you will well be aware, that thesis writing mode. And it's an arduous business. And I remember, and it was quite a powerful lesson I learned at the time, where I would sit there and you discipline yourself to punch out these thousands of words a day. And I soon realised that, probably for the first 3 or 4 hours I was quite productive. Then after that, it was just like a washout. And I remember after a while I thought, I just can't cope with this. And so I used to go off and I'd go for a run, or I'd go for a surf, or just time away. And it was interesting, because what I soon discovered is that actually by taking that time out, I would come back and invariably, if I went for a run, your mind starts, and you're picking up on ideas and get clarity of thought, you get perspective, if you like. And I'd come back and I'd be able to, punch out a lot more quality than I probably would have been able to previously.
Yeah, I found the same thing with my study program. I used to actually take a whole day out. Now you'd think, because I did mine in Christian theology, and you'd think really good thing would be to just keep reading theological books, but you're right, you can't just keep doing that. And so basically what I would do is I would take time right away from that. I'd worship, I'd go off to the bush, ride down a river on a canoe, all that sort of thing. And
so and you can even be more productive by having time out. It's like, I suppose, like sharpening a saw.
Yeah.
If you keep going with the same blunt blade, progress is slow.
Absolutely.
Hugh Mackay, you said that
the third thing he talks about, so it's reflective detachment and making sure our relationships are straight. And then the other thing that he talks about is prioritising.
Prioritising.
And I think taking time out has something to do with that.
Absolutely. And I wonder whether it seems that Sabbath is a time, if we're meant to take it out and spend it nurturing relationships, if you like. It's almost, it seems to be, putting first things first, putting it in their place. In fact, I have a little, you're probably wondering why I've got this dirt here. And I want to show you
I hope I wasn't going to eat this.
No, it's not for snacks. A little illustration, and it actually comes from Stephen Covey, who wrote a book called First Things First, probably more famous for his book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But he presents this analogy, and I want to show it to you and get your comment on whether you think it's a good anecdote of what Sabbath is like. And essentially what he said is, this is our time. And time is the same for all of us. We have the same number of hours in our week. Now, if we were to take some large rocks representing the big things that we have to do, we're talking about our relationships, for example. We're talking about our health. We're talking about the important things that we need to get done in the week, the things that really matter. And then what he goes on, he says, well, is that jar now full? And clearly you can see there's lots of spaces there. And he said, well, what we could do then, if that represents our total time, is we can then get our smaller things and we could actually put them in. And if we shuffle well, we can start to work those spaces and we can jam more things into our program. And then he says that even once we've really jam-packed that full of those smaller rocks, that even then our week's not quite full, and if we work hard we can get more out of it. And so if we get some sand or some dirt and we pour this in, and now we need to give it a good shuffle, we really need to start to tweak this, and if we keep shuffling, keep moving it as such, eventually it gets to the point where it seems like all of those gaps are filled, we're jam-packed. And then he says, but even then we can jam-pack more in, and so he takes some water and eventually pours it in, and you get the idea. And the question then he posed, he said, what's the lesson this tells us? And the point was, for many people, they think, well, if we shuffle our program good enough, we can get more into our life. And he said, no, well, that's not the point at all. The point is that if we hadn't put the big rocks in first, we would never get them in. I'm wondering is that what Sabbath is really about?
I think it is, Darren. That it's part of taking that bit of time out. It seems like a waste of time, but in fact it helps you put everything into perspective. Like Jesus made an important comment on it. He said, the Sabbath is made for the benefit of humankind. So I think we were probably made that way, and it's certainly been of great benefit to me.
Yeah, well, I too can testify to that. I discovered that many years, and I can only just imagine what sort of transformation we'd see in society at large if they were to embrace this concept. I mean, we live in a world at the moment where stress is a major issue. In most workplaces, stress is either the number one or the number two occupational health and safety issue. And to embrace a concept like Sabbath, I like what you've just said there, that it seems that we were designed for that.
Taking a holiday every week seems a good idea to me.
Yeah, why do we resist that? Why do we resist that? Ray, I want to thank you for being on the show today. Some great insights. When I reflect on what's been said, it just occurs to me that we are designed in such a way that rest is so foundational to us, to our health and to our happiness. And so I want to encourage you, consider this notion of Sabbath and the difference it could make in your life, and also make sure that you get plenty of sleep. I'm Darren Morton, reminding you to delight in God's design.